It's actually in August of 2010 that Summer and I stepped in as the campus pastors there at Victory Hamilton Mill. So that means it was April 24th, 2011. Day I will never forget. April 24th, 2011. It was Easter morning. I was laying in bed. I was praying. I was praying for you guys at Hamilton Mill. I was praying for that community. I was praying for the services. I was praying that God's kingdom would come and Jesus would be glorified. I was praying. I was asking, seeking, knocking, just laying there in bed. And then that morning, April 24th, 2011, I had what I could only describe as a Solomon moment, where God stepped into my room, and in the middle of my prayer time, he asked me a question. And he said, "How many do you want?" Immediately, I knew what he was asking. I knew he was asking, how many people do you want to be a part of the church, of the Victory family? Without even thinking, I said 100,000. Without even a blink, he said, what about 1 million? And I said, no. I said, no, my ego couldn't handle that. You know, there's a certain just brutal honesty you can have with God, right? And I was like, nah. My ego couldn't handle that. And that was it. That was it. This brief moment. But I lay there in my bed, trembling under the power of God. It was the realest moment of my entire life. Nothing in this world could ever tell me that that was untrue. I didn't even tell Summer about it for several years. Because I was like, God, this is too big. It seems audacious. It seems prideful to even talk about it. But here's what I'll say. Because of that, it was April 24th, 2011, that I knew that Summer and I were one day gonna be the senior pastors of Victory. I knew it, that's when I knew it. April 24th, 2011. Because we weren't going anywhere. Pastor Dennis and Colleen were gonna have to kick us out of this church. And I knew that God had committed something to me. And I mean that in two ways. I mean that he committed it to me. And he had also committed to bringing it to come to pass. And I knew that that could only be accomplished in the senior role. So listen, I took that moment and I just put it in my pocket. And the years started rolling by. Eventually, took years, but I told Summer. I eventually told a handful of people, but I'm gonna tell you this. I never told Pastor Dennis and Colleen. Why? Because I didn't want it to feel like I was manipulating this. And I said, God, if this is you, you're gonna bring this whole thing to come to pass. Because you can open up a door that no man can open. You can shut the door that no man can close. You can call the things that are not as though they were. The whole thing belongs to you, God. So I hold it like this. It was after transition, the whole transition, after we got the torch, that we told Pastor Dennis and Colleen. Because I didn't want to mess with the plans. I didn't want it to be like, oh, he manipulated that. I didn't touch it. We just sat back and let God do the work. And so in 2018, when Pastor Dennis and Colleen began those passing the baton, senior pastor transition conversation with us, the dream started gaining momentum again. And then I picked up a book called Hero Maker by Pastor Dave Ferguson. He's a pastor up in Chicago. And it unlocked my mind. There's so many little parts of that book. And I started a conversation with him. We started hiring new staff here at the church who could think big. And over the last really 2 years, we've been working behind the scenes because God is taking us somewhere. And then we had to start learning how to think bigger than we had been thinking. And let me just tell you, there probably 2019, end of 2019, I had finally gotten to the place where I was like, okay, I think we can do this. I think here at Victory, I think we can reach 100,000 people as part of this family. I think we can do that. And then we got an invitation to come up to Chicago by Dave Ferguson and be a part of a small group of pastors who were talking about church planting and how do we grow the kingdom, right, in unique ways. And so Pastor Olin and Pastor Avery and I went up to Chicago, and it was there in the middle of the conversation, Pastor Dave Ferguson, he said, hey guys, just take 30 minutes, and why don't you guys go into another room, and why don't you just ask God what he has to say about his dream for your church? And I remember going with Olin and Avery and sitting down, and I remember like, all right, God, well, this is dumb, right? Because like we already had this conversation. I know it was like 10 years ago, but like it's 100,000, right? Like we already talked about this. And just as real as the first time, God stepped into that moment and he said, you know, the million wasn't your idea, right? It was mine. And immediately my heart dropped. And I was like, oh God. I was like, God, we could never do that. It's too big. Like, God, there's no way I could ever do it. It's no way we could ever do that. God, there's no way a church in Atlanta, God, could ever do anything like that. God, there's no way, it's hopeless. And God spoke right into that moment. And he said, that's exactly where you need to be. Because if you could do it, you could get all the glory for it. But since you know you couldn't do it, when it comes to pass, I'm gonna get the glory for it. And there in Chicago, in the Windy City, I began to immediately start getting clarity on the future of Victory, of what God had breathed April 24, 2011. That Victory Church, Victory Church, will reach 100,000 people as part of this church family who will call Victory home. And we will be a church who influences 900,000 people through other churches, through church plants, through missions organizations locally and around the world, for a total of 1 million souls who are fully alive in Christ, emancipating God's greatness in the world around them. That is who we are. That is what we're called to do. That is the mission of God for us. I see 500 house churches. I see 12 campuses. And let me say this. That's not all this year. Some of you are like, bro, gotta get a move on this. No. That is not all this year. That is, I believe, the rest of mine and Summer's lives. But I believe I'm gonna see this in the land of the living, because this, oh my God, there's so many confirmations on this. But I believe this. I believe we're gonna spend the rest of our ministry lives on this. And when we get there, it's time for us to pass the torch to whoever's gonna lead Victory forward into the next generation. And this is so important. If you didn't even listen to the last thing I said, I need you to listen to this, okay? I don't tell you all this so you'll say, ooh, ah. I tell you all this so you'll say, whoa, I have to have a part to play in this. I don't tell you this so you'll say, wow, Pastor Johnson's awesome. I tell you this so you're like, oh, Pastor Johnson is completely incapable of doing this by himself. I guess we all have to do this together. I guess we all have to do this together. Why? Because the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Listen, guys, our land, our world, some of you are watching this from Australia right now. Listen, our world is ripe for the harvest. The problem isn't with the harvest, the problem is with the laborers. And so we gotta pray that God would send out the laborers into the harvest. Listen, this is our harvest. This is our time. We are the workers together. And I need you to notice this. I did not say that I was gonna reach a million people. I said we're gonna reach 1 million people. And so let me take a statement, because all of last year, you heard me say this 1,000 times. You heard me say, you were made for something great. And I believe that, because you're made in the image of God. You are the imago Dei. You're made in the image of God. God put gifts and talents and abilities on the inside of you that are screaming to get out, okay? I believe that you were made for something great. But as we turn the page into this next phase, I'm gonna take that and I'm gonna expand it to its ultimate capacity, and I'm gonna say this: we were made for something great. We were made for something great.